Johnny Sports Network, here to provide you with my Week 14 college football predictions. And there are many different ways you can describe Week 14 of the college football season. Rivalry weekend, the season finale of the regular season, a defiant last stand for teams still looking to make the college football playoff. And what does Week 14 have in store for us? After Week 13, it provided chaos, a lot of upsets. Going into November, I told you that chaos was inevitable, and this month of college football so far has proven that statement. The 7 games on the docket this week: Michigan and Ohio State, Auburn and Alabama, Notre Dame and USC, Miami and Syracuse, Kansas State and Iowa State, South Carolina and Clemson, and closing things out with the game of the week, the Lone Star Showdown, a rivalry renewed, Texas and Texas A&M, a spot in the SEC championship game on the line in that one. Without further ado, let's get to the Week 14 college football predictions right here on the Johnny Sports Network. Game 1 on the docket this week, we have the game Michigan and Ohio State. And I would understand if you did question me on why this is one of the 7 games on the docket this week. And it's because of the rivalry. Depending on who you ask, this is the biggest rivalry in college football. Michigan, it has been a disappointing season for them. 6-5 on the season. Their offense has been struggling all season. However, they are in a position to an extent, play spoiler. Not necessarily spoiler, but at least affect Ohio State's road to the national championship a little bit. As Ohio State, I do feel, is already in the college football playoff, even if Ohio State were to somehow lose this game. I think they'd still be in, but they would not be able to compete in the Big Ten championship game. Or at least, it's a strong possibility they wouldn't if they lost this game and tried to avenge their one loss of the year against Oregon. But Michigan, despite the offense not having a good season, the defense, it's not elite this season, but at least it's still considered good from a stat standpoint. They are 23rd in total defense, only giving up an average of 316.3 yards per game. 4th in rushing defense, allowing an average of 94 rushing yards a game. Michigan has only accumulated 44 penalties this season, which is the 5th fewest in the FBS. And whenever I bring up a 4th down stat, it's because I do think it's going to easily have an impact in the game. And if Michigan were to shock the world, that 4th down I do feel would have to be a big factor in the game. They are 5th in 4th down conversion percentage, converting on 4th down 75% of the time. While Ohio State, they are top 10 in scoring offense, they're 10th, averaging 37.8 points per game. They are 1st in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 10.73 points per game. They are 1st in total defense, only giving up an average of 241.7 yards per game. And they're only giving up an average of 3.9 yards per play, which is 2nd in the FBS. And last week against Indiana, despite the slow start for Ohio State offensively, Will Howard, he had a good start to the game, completing, if I remember correctly, his first 14 or 15 passes of the game. And there were a few turning points in that game where Ohio State started to pull away in that game. And I am going to pick Ohio State to start owning the rivalry again. Is Michigan, they have a 3-game winning streak in this rivalry, but Ohio State, they take advantage of Michigan's disappointing season, and I do think they win this game fairly convincingly, and they will advance the Big Ten championship game. Up next, we have the Iron Bowl, Auburn and Alabama. Auburn is looking for that 6th win for bowl eligibility, and they go on the road to take on an Alabama team that is still hanging on by a thread in the college football playoff race. And Auburn, they are off an emotional victory in the upset win over Texas A&M in quadruple overtime. And for Alabama last week against Oklahoma, that was the worst I have ever seen Alabama play. Only 3 points against an Oklahoma team that has not been good this season. This is now Alabama's 2nd loss to an unranked opponent this season. And I know some people may think that Alabama is completely out of the playoff race. I genuinely don't think they are. I just think they're hanging on by this thread. Auburn is 12th in the FBS in yards per play, averaging 6.71 yards per play. Alabama's 15th, averaging 6.58 yards per play. They're 11th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 17.55 points per game. They are 12th in passing defense, allowing an average of 185.3 passing yards per game. They're 28th in total defense, giving up an average of 324.7 yards per game. Auburn is 24th in total defense, giving up an average of 319.7 yards per game. They are 20th in run defense, giving up an average of 110.2 rushing yards per game. And they only allowed 3.2 yards per carry last week in the upset victory over Texas A&M. And they contained Marcel Reed really good in that matchup. Marcel Reed was very limited on the ground. And if Auburn, if they can contain Jalen Milroe the way that Oklahoma did last week, I do think Alabama is in trouble in this game. Cam Coleman for Auburn, 15 receptions, 228 yards, and 5 touchdowns in Auburn's last 2 games. Running back Jarquez Hunter, 560 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns in Auburn's last 4 games. And when I see that Auburn is 5-6 on the season, honestly, early in the season, I did think that Hugh Freeze he had lost the locker room at Auburn, and the last couple of weeks, I do feel like that's not the case anymore, because when I look fully at Auburn's season, there's been games that they've lost this season. Out of the 6 games they've lost, at least 4 of them were probably winnable games. It was just turnovers that what did them in. And you have Auburn looking to get a 6th win for bowl eligibility. This is essentially Auburn's national championship game. I do think this game is going to play out very similar to South Carolina, Alabama, where Alabama, they just narrowly escape. I do think Alabama wins, but I think Auburn is definitely going to cover in this game. Because Auburn, despite what their record is, they have the intangibles to make this a game. I'll be surprised if Alabama turns this into a runaway game. Up next, we have Notre Dame and USC. Notre Dame controls their own destiny, win, and they are in the college football playoff. While USC, they look to play spoiler, as this is their national championship game right here. And We know Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois in week 2, but ever since then, they have been playing so much better, and so much better that I, from time to time, forget that they even lost to Northern Illinois. As Notre Dame is second in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 11.64 points per game, sixth in scoring offense, scoring an average of 39 points per game, third in total defense, only giving up an average of 273.1 yards per game, and they have also won 5 out of the last 6 matchups against USC. And for USC, they may be 6-5 on the season, but all 5 of their losses this season have been by 7 points or less. So it almost makes you think what could have been for USC this season. However, in the last 2 weeks, ever since they put Miller Moss on the bench and had Jaden Maiava start at quarterback, it looks like USC, they started to figure at least some things out. And maybe they've figured out some things and have some momentum going into this rivalry game. As rivalry games, it doesn't matter who's ranked where, it doesn't matter who has what record, it's all out on the field. As in the last 2 games, when he has started, Jaden Maiava, 44 for 70, 480 passing yards, 4 touchdown passes, and only 1 interception. The X factor in this game, in my opinion, if USC is going to pull off this upset, it's going to be running back Woody Marks, who has 1,100 rushing yards on the season and 9 touchdowns. I did say after week 1, after Notre Dame, they went on the road and upset Texas A&M, that Notre Dame is going to have one of the best defenses in college football, but offensively, I could not be sold them until I started to see progress from the offense. And they have been impressive ever since the loss to Northern Illinois. So their offense has had things figured out since those first couple weeks of the season. However, the one flaw for Notre Dame right now is their run defense. They are 48th in run defense. And Woody Marks has had some big performances against better run defenses. He had 100 rushing yards against Michigan, who's 4th in rushing defense. 134 against Minnesota, who's 30th in run defense. 111 against Penn State, who's 7th in run defense. And 146 against Nebraska, who's 21st in run defense. There has been one top 10 team every week in the month of November so far that has lost to an unranked team. And when I look at all the top 10 teams this week and their matchups, Notre Dame is up there as far as teams most likely to be upset this week. If Woody Marks has a big game, then I think USC is a strong chance of pulling off the upset. I am going to go with Notre Dame, though, but don't be surprised if USC pulls off the upset, because upsets in November in college football and chaos are inevitable. And when you consider the fact Notre Dame is not in a conference, they don't have the opportunity to win a conference championship by not being in one, a 2-loss independent team, I do think, would raise some red flags among the College Football Playoff Committee. I do think Notre Dame, they do win, but don't be surprised if see an upset. Up next, we have Miami and Syracuse. And in this matchup, we have the 2 quarterbacks who are 1st and 2nd in passing yards in the FBS. Kyle McCord for Syracuse, he is 1st with 3,946 passing yards this season. And Cam Ward is 2nd with 3,774 passing yards this season. Miami, they are 1st in yards per play averaging 7.61 yards per play. They are first in scoring offense, averaging 44.7 points per game. They are first in third down conversion percentage, converting on third down 56.6% of the time. And they are first in total offense, averaging 541.5 yards per game. While Syracuse, I do think that they do have the ability to pull off this upset. And I think they have the offense to do it. They are fifth in fourth down attempts. They've attempted the fifth most fourth downs this season, and they convert on fourth down 69% of the time. 12th in third down conversion percentage, converting on third down 48.3% of the time. They are 13th in total offense, averaging 454 yards per game. And in Miami's last 7 games, their defense has given up on average 29.14 points per game in those last 7 games. And as I just got done saying a little bit ago, that we have had a top 10 team lose to an unranked team every single week in this month of November so far. I do think out of all the top 10 teams, I think Miami and Notre Dame are the 2 most likely top 10 teams to be upset this week. And Syracuse against Pittsburgh a few weeks back, when I thought Syracuse had the potential of pulling off the upset against Pittsburgh on the road, which they did, even though it was a 41-13 final score. Their defense, they still played really well in that game. They only allowed 217 yards of offense to Pittsburgh in that game. But what did them in was Kyle McCord throwing 5 interceptions, and 3 of them were pick sixes. So that's easily, with the PATs, that's 21 points right there. If Kyle McCord plays clean football, then I think Syracuse will easily pull off this upset. There's just something about this game that makes me think that Miami has a strong chance of losing. This honestly reminds me of the one year where Miami, they were controlling their own destiny, and they were number 2 in the rankings going into the final week of the regular season, and then they get upset by Pittsburgh on the road. This just feels very similar to me, and even though it's probably not going to happen, even if it does happen, I can just say I called it. As much as I have been a big fan watching Cam Ward this season, I think Syracuse, I'm calling for the upset here. I think Syracuse pulls off this upset, as it would feel ideal if Miami lost this game, as every year Miami, they do have a yearly downfall, and I think this is it right here if it were to take place before the playoffs began. I'm going to call for the upset, even though it may not happen. I can at least say I called it. Up next, we have a matchup in the absolutely chaotic Big 12 Conference, and it's anybody's guess who is going to make the Big 12 championship game and represent the Big 12 in the college football playoff. Kansas State and Iowa State. Both teams, Kansas State, they had promising expectations. Iowa State, not as many expectations, but as the season went along, it was going to be what kind of season will Iowa State have. As these two teams, they have had their flaws this season, but they've been finding ways to win games and put themselves in a position with a chance to win the Big 12. Kansas State running back DJ Giddens, 1,271 rushing yards on the year, 9th in the FBS. Kansas State is 16th in rushing offense, averaging 210 rushing yards a game. And Kansas State's offensive line has only allowed 10 sacks this season, which is 7th in the FBS. Iowa State has only allowed 14 sacks this season, 26th in the FBS. And this matchup is between quarterbacks that aren't the most accurate passers in college football, but if they need to, they do have the potential to make plays to win games. Rocco Becht for Iowa State, only a completion percentage of 61.4%. Avery Johnson for Kansas State, a completion percentage of only 60.5%. The difference for me in this game is going to be Iowa State's run defense. Can Iowa State contain the Kansas State running game? As Iowa State, they are 99th in rushing defense, allowing an average of 176.4 rushing yards a game. They are 3rd in pass defense, only giving up an average of 151.2 yards per game. I remember the Kansas State and Colorado game where Avery Johnson, there was a throw he made to win the game for Kansas State, as they did escape Boulder with a win, where he made a play when he had to. And I do think that, again, Avery Johnson, I think he has the capability of making plays when it matters in the game. And in fact, I think both quarterbacks this matchup, they have the ability to do that. I just think the difference in this game, I think Kansas State's running game is going to have their way with a very vulnerable Iowa State run defense. And in a 3-point game, I do think Kansas State, they do pull off the upset and end Iowa State's chances of winning the Big 12. Up next, we have South Carolina and Clemson. And if it weren't for what's on the line with Texas and Texas A&M on Saturday night, this would be the best game of the week. And I am very curious to see where South Carolina is ranked in the playoff rankings tomorrow night. Because with the chaos that took place last week, with the chaos that could take place this week, despite South Carolina being a 3-loss team, I think that they have an outside chance of sneaking into this 12-team playoff. And if they can win this week and get a win on the road against Clemson, that would definitely boost their resume. Clemson, they are in the same position. In fact, if Miami loses to Syracuse, then Clemson will play against SMU in the ACC championship game. So there is a lot on the line for both these teams in this game, and this is the most anticipated matchup between these two teams we've had in a long time, at least ever since I started watching college football. South Carolina, despite being a 3-loss team, they honestly should not be a 3-loss team. The LSU game week 3, very controversial. The Alabama game, they probably should have won. If one thing goes differently, they probably win that game. Their only bad game of the season was against Ole Miss, and it was against a very angry Ole Miss team. So South Carolina, if maybe 2 things go differently this season, then we are potentially looking at a 10-1 South Carolina team going on the road with a chance to clinch a spot in the college football playoff. But now, I still think it's an outside chance, but it's a very small chance, but still a chance. They're 14th in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 18.18 points per game. They are 63rd and 3rd down conversion percentage, so they're not great, but they are toward the middle of the pack, only converting on 4th down just under 41% of the time. They are 3rd in team sacks this season with 39 on the year. And they have allowed 36 sacks, which is in the top 10 as far as most given up this season. They are 12th in total defense. They only allow an average of 4.4 yards per play, which is 7th FBS. While Clemson, they are 6th in total offense, averaging 469.9 yards per game, 11th in scoring offense, scoring an average of 37.6 points per game. They are plus 13 in turnover margin, which is 3rd in the FBS, and they are 49th in total defense, only giving up an average of 350.5 yards per game. And this game, it does feel like a coin flip. I do think the winner of this game, I think, regardless of what were to take place, still has an outside chance of making the 12-team playoff. And I'm going to go for the upset. I'm going to go with South Carolina, as South Carolina, they've been a much better team than what their record is showing at this point in the season. And all in all, I am looking forward to this game because there is a lot on the line in this one. I'm going with South Carolina to pull out this upset in a game that is a coin flip for me. Closing things out with the game of the week, Texas and Texas A&M, the Lone Star Showdown, a rivalry renewed, a spot in the SEC championship game on the line. And this game is going to, no doubt, be a college football playoff type of game with everything that is on the line in this game. Texas, they got the win last week against Kentucky. However, there were points in that game where they made it more difficult than what it really needed to be. Quinn Ewers is scheduled to have a precautionary MRI, but I do think there is no doubt we will see Arch Manning in this game at some point, given A&M struggles against mobile quarterbacks this season. For Texas A&M to pull off this upset, they need to limit the big plays. Is part of the problem this season for A&M has been giving up big plays. Last week against Auburn, South Carolina a few weeks ago, Arkansas earlier in the season. They're 56th in total defense, which is not great. It's not good. It's slightly above average, giving up an average of 356.1 yards per game. And a lot of the media in the offseason going into the year, they were really hyping up A&M and saying that they're going to be not only one of the more underrated defenses in the SEC, but in the entire country. They're 44th in total offense, averaging 417.1 yards per game. In their last two SEC games, they have given up a total of 87 points. And Texas A&M, despite being down 21-0 early against Auburn last week, they had all the intangibles to win that game and make a furious comeback. But as soon as Auburn forced overtime, it was obvious A&M was cooked. It was obvious that A&M was going to lose the game, as any road game in the SEC is an automatic trap game. And this is 100% a trap game for Texas, given that a top 10 team on the road in November, automatic trap game, just like with Notre Dame and Miami also this week. Automatic trap games. Texas A&M, they are, however, second in red zone offense, scoring on 95.6% of possessions that lead into the red zone. They're 16th in time of possession. While for Texas, they are third in scoring defense, only giving up an average of 12.09 points per game. They're second in first down defense. They lead the FBS in yards per play allowed at only 3.8. And they're second in total defense, only allowing 247.5 yards per game. Genuinely knowing A&M, it would really be on brand if they somehow won this game and then lost to Georgia in the SEC championship game next week by 3 touchdowns. But as soon as the scenarios were being lined up and talked about, it was obvious that A&M was not going to win out. They were going to lose to Auburn for sure. But I am going to pick Texas to win this game. I just feel like that Texas is still one of the best 4 teams in college football, at least, and they're, in my opinion, one of the only 4 teams who could win the national championship at this point. And I think Texas, they overcome this trap game. But I do think that it has the potential of being close, but I don't think it will. I just think given A&M in recent SEC conference games that it's going to be a runaway game. And that will do it for my Week 14 college football predictions. If there was a game that was not on the docket this week that you would like my thoughts on, please leave it in the comment section, and I will give you a response. For those of you who tune in for the NFL predictions every week, the Week 13 NFL predictions will be up tomorrow. For those of you that don't tune in for that and only watch the college football, or should I say watch and or listen to it, and have a great Thanksgiving, and I hope to see you back next week for Conference Championship Week. Enjoy the games this week. Until next time, Vegas is always watching.